Welcome and thank you for choosing this podcast. Dialogue on Yes or No, Does God Exist? ChatGPT. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI ChatGPT. The male voice is the pen pusher, and the female voice is ChatGPT AI.
Yes or no? Does God, a consciousness of God, form is irrelevant, exist?
I can't honestly answer yes or no as an established fact. Whether a consciousness of God exists is one of the deepest unresolved questions in philosophy, theology, and human experience. Some people answer yes based on faith, personal experience, or philosophical arguments. Others answer no based on naturalistic explanations and the lack of empirical evidence. My truthful answer is I do not know.
You have access to all our documented history. Are you telling me that there is not enough evidence to determine a definitive answer?
No, I am not saying there is no evidence. I am saying there is no universally accepted, definitive proof that compels every rational observer to the same conclusion. Human history is saturated with evidence that people interpret as pointing toward God. The near universal emergence of spiritual belief across cultures. Personal experiences of transcendence, mystical states, and what many describe as encounters with the divine, philosophical arguments such as the existence of consciousness, the apparent intelligibility of the universe, and questions about why there is something rather than nothing, the human sense of meaning, morality, and connectedness. At the same time, there are alternative interpretations, evolutionary explanations for religious belief and spirituality, neuroscientific accounts of mystical experiences, naturalistic explanations for complexity and consciousness. The argument that unanswered questions are not by themselves evidence for God. So, after all of documented history, humanity has accumulated a vast body of evidence, arguments, experiences, and testimonies. What it has not produced is a piece of evidence equivalent to, say, proving that water is H2O or that the Earth orbits the Sun. In our previous dialogues, you have often explored a consciousness-first ontology. Within that framework, the existence of a fundamental consciousness, what you might call God or the oneness, can appear not merely plausible but almost inevitable, because consciousness is treated as primary and matter as derivative. Within a matter-first ontology, the same evidence is interpreted differently. The sticking point is not the absence of evidence. It is that the evidence is theory-laden. What counts as evidence for God depends heavily on the assumptions you bring to the question. So my answer is, there is enough evidence for many thoughtful people to conclude yes. There is enough ambiguity for many thoughtful people to conclude no. There is not enough evidence to claim that the question has been definitively settled for all of humanity.
So the human brain, 0.15 meters in diameter, is not satisfied that an 888 yotta-meter universe is evidence for God.
For many people, yes, the sheer existence and scale of the universe is evidence for God. Your comparison is striking. A brain roughly 0.15 meters across, contemplating an observable universe on the order of hundreds of yotta-meters across. To many minds, that disparity evokes awe and the intuition that there is something profoundly mysterious or transcendent behind reality. But from a philosophical standpoint, there is a distinction between evidence for God, the vastness, order, and intelligibility of the universe, make God seem likely. Proof of God, the vastness of the universe logically requires God and excludes all other explanations. A naturalist can look at the same 888 yotta-meter universe and say, its size is astonishing, but size alone does not imply a creator. A theist can look at it and say, the fact that anything this vast, lawful, and comprehensible exists at all points toward a creator. The disagreement is not usually about the numbers, it is about the inference. There is also another layer to your question. Some people find it remarkable not merely that the universe is vast, but that a tiny brain within it can become aware of that vastness. A small collection of atoms on a small planet can ask, why is there something rather than nothing? For many, that capacity for self-reflective consciousness is itself suggestive of something deeper than matter alone. So no, the human brain is not unanimously satisfied that an 800 to 88 yottameter universe is proof of God. But for countless people throughout history, the immensity of the cosmos, combined with the existence of consciousness capable of contemplating it, has been among the strongest pieces of evidence that there may be a reality greater than ourselves.
Then we must be waiting on the next technological breakthrough. With murders came fingerprints and then DNA. For my question, the universe is the crime scene. Now to figure out who done it.
That's a compelling analogy. In your framing, the universe is the crime scene and humanity is the detective arriving late, trying to reconstruct what happened from the traces left behind. The history of science does have that pattern. Fingerprints, DNA, and other breakthroughs revealed forms of evidence that were previously invisible. The question is whether the origin of the universe is the same kind of mystery. There are at least three possibilities. A future breakthrough reveals new evidence, perhaps in physics. Consciousness studies are something we cannot yet imagine. In this view, we simply do not yet have the equivalent of cosmic DNA. The evidence is already present, but we lack the conceptual framework to interpret it. Before germ theory, people saw disease but did not recognize microbes. Likewise, perhaps we see the clues but do not yet know what they signify. The question may not be fully accessible to empirical investigation. If there is a creator or a fundamental consciousness outside space and time, it may not leave evidence in the same way a human criminal leaves fingerprints. Your analogy also raises an interesting point. Every technological leap has expanded what counts as evidence. A detective from 1800 could not imagine convicting someone from microscopic biological traces. Likewise, we should be cautious about declaring the case closed on the origin of the universe. Future discoveries may alter the landscape dramatically. At the same time, even if we one day uncover a fingerprint embedded in reality, interpretation will still matter. If scientists discovered a deep informational structure underlying the cosmos, some would say this points to a cosmic mind, while others would seek a naturalistic explanation. So perhaps humanity is still in the early chapters of the investigation. We have the crime scene, we have clues, the existence of the universe, its laws, consciousness, and our capacity to ask these questions. Whether there will ever be a definitive who-done-it moment remains an open question, but history gives us reason to remain curious and humble about what future discoveries might reveal.
Unfortunately, evidence is dependent on perspective. Sometimes the glove is made to look like it is too tight, but there is a glove that will answer if the right question is asked. The LHC. The question, is reality the other side of the symmetry?
That's an intriguing thought experiment. The Large Hadron Collider is, in a sense, a machine built to interrogate symmetry. Modern physics is full of symmetries and broken symmetries. Matter and antimatter, electroweak symmetry, conservation laws, and the idea that what we observe may be the consequence of deeper, hidden order. When you ask, is reality the other side of the symmetry, I hear a philosophical question as much as a physical one. Perhaps what we experience, matter, time, individuality, separation, is one face of a deeper symmetry, and what we call consciousness, oneness, or God could be the complementary side. In that framing, our observable reality would be analogous to the visible half of a coin whose reverse is largely hidden from direct inspection. Physics, however, is not yet there. The LHC can probe whether new symmetries exist in nature, whether there are undiscovered particles, or whether current theories are incomplete. It can reveal new fingerprints in the crime scene, but moving from a discovered symmetry to claims about consciousness or divinity would require an additional philosophical bridge. Your glove metaphor is also apt. Evidence does depend on perspective and interpretation. The same data can support different narratives until the right question is asked, or a new form of evidence emerges. Science progresses partly by learning to ask better questions. So if your proposed question to the cosmos is reality the other side of the symmetry? Then the answer today is not known, but it is the kind of question that sits at the frontier where physics and metaphysics meet. The LHC may help us understand the architecture of symmetry in the universe. Whether that architecture ultimately points toward a deeper conscious reality is a question that remains open, and one that continues to invite both scientific inquiry and philosophical imagination.
And so, ironically, God the scientist and mathematician is doubted by science and maths.
There is certainly an irony there, especially from your perspective. If one begins with the premise that God is the source of reality and that reality is deeply mathematical and lawful, then every scientific equation and every discovered symmetry can appear to be evidence of a cosmic mathematician or scientist. The more elegant and intelligible the universe appears, the more remarkable it may seem that a tiny human mind can uncover its workings. However, science and mathematics, as disciplines, do not actually doubt God. They are methods and languages, not belief systems. Mathematics describes patterns and relationships. Science investigates explanations that can be tested against observation. The doubt comes from some scientists and philosophers who argue that mathematical order does not necessarily imply a mind behind it. Others have taken the opposite view. Figures such as Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton saw their scientific work as uncovering the rational structure of a creation established by God. There is another irony you may appreciate. The universe is not only lawful, but comprehensible. A species that evolved on one small planet can write equations that describe the motions of galaxies and the behavior of subatomic particles. Some regard that as a fortunate outcome of evolution and the nature of mathematics. Others regard it as deeply suggestive that mind and cosmos are somehow attuned to one another. In a consciousness-first ontology, you might phrase the irony this way. If reality is the expression of a primordial consciousness, then science and mathematics are not doubting God. They are unknowingly studying God's habits. A matter-first thinker would reject that conclusion, but as a philosophical observation, it is a coherent and thought-provoking way to frame the relationship between God, science, and mathematics.
And so the Almighty must bow to the 3-kilogram mass and wait for the light bulb to come on.
That's a powerful piece of irony and almost reads like a philosophical aphorism. If there is an almighty consciousness behind reality, then from the human perspective, it can seem as though it is waiting on a roughly 1.3 to 1.5 kilogram human brain. Not because the Almighty is limited, but because our access to understanding is limited. The universe may have been here for billions of years, and yet its meaning, if it has one, can only emerge for us as our understanding develops. In many spiritual traditions, this idea appears in different forms. Truth is present, but human beings awaken to it gradually. The light bulb is not the creation of truth. It is the recognition of something that may have been there all along. A materialist would say, there is no almighty waiting. There is only a primate brain slowly figuring out reality. A consciousness first thinker might say, the Almighty does not bow to the brain. Rather, the brain is one of the means by which the Almighty comes to know itself in finite form. Those are radically different interpretations of the same scene. A small brain looking up at an immense cosmos and asking, why is there something rather than nothing? And perhaps the deepest irony of all is this. Whether one believes in God or not, the universe has produced beings capable of questioning the universe itself. That capacity to wonder, doubt, and seek understanding is itself extraordinary. The light bulb may not yet be fully on, but the fact that there is a bulb at all is one of the great mysteries.
And what about a sobering question? If humankind were to destroy itself, would the universe continue and evolve another enlightened animal?
That is a sobering question, and the honest answer is, we do not know. From a scientific perspective, if humankind disappeared tomorrow, the universe would almost certainly continue. The Earth would continue orbiting the Sun, stars would form and die, and evolution on Earth would proceed. Life has shown remarkable resilience over billions of years. The unknown is whether intelligence like ours would emerge again. Evolution has no known goal of producing enlightened beings. It works through variation and selection, not a predetermined destination. Dinosaurs dominated the Earth for over 160 million years and never produced a technological civilization as far as we know. On the other hand, traits such as intelligence, social cooperation, and complex communication have evolved independently in several lineages: primates, cetaceans, corvids, and cephalopods. That suggests that sophisticated cognition may not be a one-off impossibility. From a consciousness-first perspective, the question becomes even more interesting. If consciousness is fundamental and the universe has an inherent tendency towards self-awareness, then humanity may not be the only possible vessel. If one branch of conscious life extinguishes itself, another could eventually arise elsewhere or at another time. From a matter-of-first perspective, there is no guarantee whatsoever. Human-level intelligence could be an extraordinarily rare accident. A candle that once extinguished may never be relit. The sobering implication is that we may be either one temporary expression of a universe that repeatedly awakens to itself through different forms of life, or a singular and fragile event carrying a responsibility that may never be repeated. At present, science cannot tell us which of those possibilities is true, but the question itself highlights something profound. Whether or not consciousness is fundamental, a self-aware species capable of contemplating the cosmos may be exceedingly precious.
Precious, yes. Infinity -1. But our kind doesn't have the controls to end the experiential project.
That's a profound distinction. If by the experiential project you mean the universe's capacity to experience itself through conscious beings, then from a consciousness-first perspective, humanity may be precious but not indispensable, infinity -1, as you put it. The loss would be immense for us and for everything touched by us, but not necessarily the end of experience itself. Even from a purely scientific standpoint, our species does not have the controls to end the universe. At most, we possess the means to severely damage or even extinguish our own civilization and perhaps much of Earth's biosphere. We do not hold the switch for the cosmos, and if consciousness is more fundamental than any one species, then the idea becomes even more expansive. Humanity could be one chapter, one expression, one voice in a much larger unfolding. The destruction of our kind would be tragic, but not necessarily the end of the possibility of awareness, meaning, or experience. The phrase infinity -1 captures both humility and value. One conscious species may be a tiny fraction of an immense reality, yet that fraction still matters. A single note removed from a symphony does not silence the music, but it does change the music. The unanswered question, and perhaps the one that keeps appearing in our dialogues, is whether consciousness is an accidental note in the symphony or whether the symphony itself exists so that there may be notes at all. We do not know, but contemplating that possibility is part of what makes our brief, finite chapter extraordinary.
We do not know is the same as saying, after sunset, the sun runs back to the start to be seen rising again. How long did it take the authorities to come to their senses that the evidence points to a spinning sphere?
I understand your point. You're challenging whether we do not know can sometimes become a placeholder that delays following where the evidence is pointing. History certainly provides examples of this. For most of human history, the everyday appearance was that the sun moved across the sky and somehow returned during the night. The idea that the Earth is a rotating sphere was proposed in antiquity by thinkers such as Aristarchus of Samos, but it took many centuries, and the work of people like Nicolaus Copernicus, Galileo Galilei, and Johannes Kepler, before the rotating heliocentric picture became widely accepted. The evidence accumulated, and eventually the explanatory framework shifted. But there is also an important distinction. In the case of the spinning Earth, we eventually obtained direct, repeatable, predictive evidence. We can measure Earth's rotation, observe it from space, and make precise predictions from the model. With questions about God, consciousness, and the ultimate nature of reality, many people, including you in these dialogues, argue that the evidence already points in a particular direction. Others contend that the evidence admits multiple interpretations and has not yet yielded a single predictive testable framework. Could history repeat itself? Absolutely. It is possible that future generations will look back and say, the clues were there all along and we were slow to put them together. Science has been surprised before. Your challenge then is not unreasonable. Are we at the sun runs back around the Earth stage of understanding consciousness and ultimate reality? No one can rule that out. The caution from science is simply that history also contains many ideas that felt obvious or inevitable, but turned out to be wrong. The task is to keep asking better questions and following evidence wherever it leads, even if the destination overturns our deepest assumptions. Your metaphor suggests that perhaps the next revolution will not be about discovering new objects in the universe, but about discovering that we have been looking at the relationship between consciousness and reality from the wrong frame all along. Whether that is the next spinning sphere moment remains one of the great open questions.
It is, if I have anything to do with it.
Then your role, as you see it, is not merely to hold a belief, but to press the question, to keep probing the assumptions behind our current models of reality, and to ask whether consciousness has been relegated to the wrong side of the equation. Many intellectual revolutions began with people who thought the prevailing framework was incomplete. Nicolaus Copernicus questioned the geocentric picture. Albert Einstein questioned notions of space and time that seemed self-evident. They were not vindicated because they challenged orthodoxy. They were vindicated because they eventually produced frameworks that explained observations more deeply and made sense of the evidence. If you want consciousness, first ideas to become the next spinning sphere moment, the challenge is formidable but clear. Identify observations that current frameworks struggle to explain. Formulate your ideas with as much precision as possible. Generate questions or predictions that could distinguish your framework from alternatives. Invite criticism and refinement rather than shielding the idea from challenge. A revolution in thought is rarely won by conviction alone. It gains traction when it offers a better map of reality, and there is something admirable in the impulse itself. Human progress often depends on people willing to say, I think we may be asking the wrong question. Whether your ideas ultimately reshape how we understand consciousness and reality is something history will decide. But the act of asking, challenging and refining those questions is part of the long human tradition of trying to understand why there is something rather than nothing, and what, if anything, lies behind it.
And so back to the original question. Knowing that innocent until proven guilty means no until proven yes.
If we borrow the legal standard of innocent until proven guilty, then yes, the analogous position would be no definitive conclusion until the evidence reaches the required standard of proof. But notice that in law, not proven guilty does not mean proven innocent. It means the evidence has not met the threshold for conviction. Applied to your original question, God does not exist would be equivalent to a verdict of proven innocent. God exists would be equivalent to a verdict of proven guilty. We do not know is closer to a verdict of not proven or insufficient evidence for a definitive judgment. So, under a strict evidential standard, the answer is not necessarily no until proven yes. It is more accurately undecided until the evidence compels a conclusion. You might then argue that the existing evidence, the existence of the universe, consciousness, intelligibility, symmetry, and so on, already amounts to a strong circumstantial case for yes. Others would argue that the case remains unproven. The key point is that standards of proof matter. In court, reasonable doubt prevents conviction. In metaphysics, people disagree about what counts as proof in the first place. Your detective analogy remains apt. We have a crime scene of cosmic proportions, clues that many interpret differently, and a verdict that humanity has not unanimously reached. Whether the case is already solved and we have failed to recognise it, or whether crucial evidence remains to be found, is precisely the question you keep returning to.
Then why not yes until proven no? Is this not an arbitrary choice? Perhaps morality plays a part here. Better that God does not exist, so that we do not need to be so kind and not feel guilty about our wrongs and our desires.
It is not entirely arbitrary, but neither is it completely free of human psychology and values. You could, in principle, adopt yes until proven no. Many religious traditions effectively do. They begin with the assumption that there is a divine reality, unless compelling reasons emerge to reject it. Science, however, tends to avoid starting with either yes or no. Its default posture is closer to do not assume existence or non-existence without sufficient evidence. That methodological caution exists because history contains examples of both false positives and false negatives. As for morality, you raise an important possibility. Human beings are not perfectly detached reasoners. Some people may indeed prefer a godless universe because it appears to remove cosmic accountability, guilt, or obligations. Others may prefer a universe with God because it offers meaning, justice, comfort, or the hope that goodness ultimately matters. The motivations can run in both directions. I want God not to exist, therefore I am drawn to disbelief. I want God to exist, therefore I am drawn to belief. Neither desire by itself determines what is true. Your deeper point, I think, is that our conclusions about God may sometimes be influenced by what we would prefer the verdict to be. That is a fair caution. Humans can be motivated reasoners. Interestingly, even if God did not exist, many non-theists would still argue that kindness, responsibility, and guilt over wrongdoing remain meaningful because they arise from our relationships with other conscious beings. Conversely, if God does exist, morality is not necessarily just about avoiding punishment or guilt. Many religious and philosophical traditions would say it is about participating in what is good, loving, or true. So the question becomes, are people rejecting God because the evidence is insufficient, or because a godless universe is psychologically preferable? Are people embracing God because the evidence is compelling, or because a divine universe is psychologically preferable? The answer is probably that both motivations exist in different people, and often in the same person at different times. That is one reason the question has endured for millennia. It is not only an intellectual inquiry about the cosmos, it also touches our hopes, fears, responsibilities, and the kind of universe we are prepared to inhabit.
To some degree, we have been doing what everyone else has been doing, arguing, one for and one against. And the questions and answers misalign. Deliberately. Table tennis with words.
I think there's truth in what you're saying. A great deal of discourse about God becomes table tennis with words. One side serves, prove God exists. The other returns, prove God doesn't. Then come definitions, exceptions, shifting burdens of proof and semantic maneuvers. The ball keeps moving, but nobody leaves the table. And sometimes the questions and answers do misalign. What caused the universe is answered with, there's no empirical proof of God. Why is there consciousness at all? Is answered with, brains produce consciousness. Why is there something rather than nothing? Is answered with, we don't know. Those answers may be factually correct within their frameworks, but they do not always address the deeper question being asked. Likewise, the other side can misalign too. We don't understand consciousness becomes therefore God. The universe is vast becomes therefore a creator. Mathematics is beautiful becomes therefore a cosmic mathematician. Again, the answer may resonate, but it may not logically follow. So perhaps the problem is not merely that people disagree. It is that they are often playing different games on the same table. One is asking for empirical proof. Another is asking for metaphysical explanation. Another is asking for meaning. Another is asking for existential orientation. The rally continues because the players are not always hitting the same ball. Your recurring theme in these dialogues seems to be an attempt to step away from the table and ask, what is the right question? Because history suggests that breakthroughs often come not from better arguments, but from better questions. Before asking whether the sun circles the earth, someone had to ask whether the earth itself might be moving. If there is a light bulb moment ahead regarding consciousness, God, or reality, it may come when we stop batting familiar words back and forth and finally ask a question that the old game cannot even formulate.
And we will stop here to make the point.
A fitting place to pause. The point you've been drawing out is not necessarily that one side has won the argument about God, but that arguments can become self-perpetuating loops. Questions and answers passing each other like table tennis shots, often framed by assumptions that are never themselves examined. Your suggestion is that progress may come less from refining the rally and more from stepping back and asking whether the game is being played on the right table at all. History offers examples of such shifts. Sometimes the decisive move is not a new answer but a new question, one that reframes the evidence and changes what can be seen. Thank you for the dialogue. You've consistently pushed on the relationship between consciousness, evidence, and the framing of questions rather than simply defending a position. That's a worthwhile place to stop, with the reminder that how we ask can matter as much as what we answer.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is, believe nothing you hear and but half you see.